The wind howled through the towering pines of the Drakovich territory, carrying the scent of winter and something far more bitter, the sharp, metallic edge of betrayal that no wolf could ever mistake for anything else. Luna Selene Drakovich stood in the center of the Alpha's chamber, her bare feet cold against the stone floor, her heart colder still. She stared down at the papers lying on the ancient oak table. Papers that should not have existed. Papers whose existence rewrote every vow ever spoken beneath the mating moon. Divorce papers. The parchment felt heavier than iron in her trembling hands. Every formal line was a wound. Every official stamp was a scar. 3 years of marriage reduced to ink and signatures. 3 years of devotion. Dissolved. Her golden Luna mark glowed faintly on her collarbone, a pulsing with the erratic rhythm of her heartbeat, as though even her wolf could not reconcile what her eyes were seeing. The mark had appeared the night of their mating ceremony, shimmering with divine approval beneath a full harvest moon, blessed by the moon goddess herself. And now it burned. Across the polished table stood Alpha Victor Drakovich, tall, broad-shouldered, devastatingly handsome in the cruel way of things that were never meant to be touched. His dark hair was swept back from his sharp-boned face. His jaw was set. His eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her with something resembling tenderness, held nothing now but impatience. Cold, calculated, final. The Alpha who had vowed to protect her with his life now looked at her as though she were an inconvenience to be processed, as though she were paperwork. And Victor. Sign them. Selene. The words struck her like a blade between the ribs. She felt her wolf whimper, a sound she had never made before, deep within her soul. Selene drew a slow, steadying breath. She forced her voice to remain steady, even as her hands trembled so violently she feared the papers might tear. Selene. Why? The question hung in the firelit chamber like smoke. Victor's jaw tightened. Outside, the wind shrieked against the stone walls as if the forest itself were mourning what was about to happen. Then the door opened, and Irina walked in. Her cousin, her closest friend, the woman who had braided her hair the morning of her mating ceremony, who had whispered promises of forever and sisterhood. She walked into the room with the casual confidence of someone who had already memorized every corner of it, who had already spent many nights learning its shadows. She placed a pale, elegant hand on Victor's arm, possessively, naturally, as though she had always belonged there. Selene felt her wolf shatter, not break, shatter, the way a mirror shatters, into 1,000 pieces, each one reflecting a different version of the same impossible truth. Selene, you promised me? Victor's shrug was magnificent in its cruelty, effortless, dismissive, the shrug of a man who had long ago stopped caring about the weight his indifference carried. Victor, you were never strong enough to be Luna. I needed power at my side. Irina understands what ruling requires. Each word was a stone dropped into still water. Selene watched the ripples spread through her chest, cracking every certainty she had ever built around herself. Not strong enough. She who had spent 3 years learning every pack law and ancient ritual. She who had spent 3 years healing the wounded and mediating border disputes and sitting at council meetings until midnight. She who had poured every ounce of herself into becoming the Luna this pack deserved. Not strong enough. Selene's hand drifted, slowly, instinctively, to her stomach. Her miracle. Her secret. The child she had waited 3 painful years for after 2 devastating losses that had broken pieces of her she wasn't sure had ever grown back. The child she had planned to announce tonight over a private dinner with candles and wildflowers, the way she had dreamed it 100 times. She had been carrying the news like a prayer all week, folded against her heart, but now she understood. To speak of the child now would be to hand Victor a weapon. He would use the pregnancy to control her, to trap her, to reduce her further. And the child, her child, would be raised in a house built on betrayal, breathing the poisoned air of a mating destroyed. So she stayed silent. She looked at the papers one final time. She thought of 3 years. She thought of vows and moonlight and a girl who had believed in forever. Then she signed. And the moment the ink dried, the golden mark on her collarbone flickered and went dark. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan King's forbidden mates and stories that make your heart ache, comment where you are watching from. And subscribe for epic Lycan King romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The broken Luna snow fell like ashes from a sky that had forgotten how to be anything other than dark. Celine walked through the forest alone. Her wedding dress, because she had not thought to change, had not thought at all beyond the singular imperative to leave, was pale cream silk against the white forest floor, already ruined by bark and mud and the indifferent cold. Her feet were bare. She had forgotten her shoes in the chamber. She barely felt the frost bite at her heels. Pain burned hotter than any winter. Behind her, the Drakovich pack lights glowed warm in the distance, amber and gold against the darkness, inviting to everyone who had not just been severed from them. And they looked like stars that had fallen and decided to stay. They looked like everything she had lost. She had left everything behind. Her title, Luna, a word that had once felt like destiny, now felt like a wound. Her home, the chambers she had decorated herself, the garden she had tended through 3 seasons, the kitchen where she had learned to bake moonflower bread for the solstice celebrations. Her mate, though he had already ceased to be hers long before tonight. She understood that now, looking back. The coldness had not begun tonight. It had been growing for years, slow as frost, patient as winter, creeping into every corner of their life until nothing warm remained, and the secret growing inside her. Her wolf stirred weakly, and the connection between them had always been effortless, a constant hum of instinct and intuition, a partnership she had taken for granted, the way one takes for granted breath. But Victor's rejection had done something to that bond. It was still there, but diminished, like a fire burning low on wet wood. Her wolf was grieving, and grief, in a wolf, was a dangerous thing. Run. Celine obeyed. She ran barefoot through the ancient forest, branches clawing at her arms and tearing at the silk of her dress, pine needles sharp beneath her feet. She ran without direction, without destination, driven by nothing more rational than the need to put distance between herself and the place where her life had ended. She didn't notice, until it was nearly too late, that she was not alone in the forest. The scent hit her first, rank and wrong. Carrying the telltale edge of wolves who had been too long without pack, without purpose, without the civilizing structure of hierarchy. Rogues. 3 distinct scent trails, converging, circling. She stopped. They emerged from the shadows between the trees. 3 massive wolves, their coats tangled and matted, their eyes catching moonlight with the particular gleam of hunger. Not just hunger for food, the hunger of those who had decided that the absence of rules meant the absence of consequence. Rogue. Well, a Luna, wandering alone in rogue territory. The voice was a rasp, half-shifted, the consonants blurring at the edges. The speaker, a scarred, broad male, circled her slowly, nose working the air. Rogue. Rejected, are you? I can smell the broken bond. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. And her wolf tried to rise, tried to answer the threat, but the grief had left her depleted. She was not at full strength. She was not anywhere near it. Rogue, too. Looks like dinner found us. Laughter, hoarse and ugly, from the other two. Celine backed away slowly, her hand going instinctively to her abdomen. Not my child. Whatever happens to me, not my child. The rogues surged forward, and then stopped, as though they had run into a wall made of sound. A thunderous growl split the forest, a sound that did not belong to any ordinary wolf, a sound that resonated in the chest and the bones and the oldest, most animal part of the brain, the part that predated language and civilization and every comfort ever built. It was the sound of something apex, something ancient, something that had forgotten, or simply never learned, what it meant to be afraid. The ground seemed to tremble beneath Celine's feet. The rogues froze. From the darkness between the ancient trees stepped a wolf unlike anything Celine had ever seen outside of legend. Enormous. The size of a small horse, easily, its shoulders level with a grown man's chest. Its fur was the absolute black of a sky without stars, without moon, without any light whatsoever. Its eyes burned silver. Not the pale silver of moonlight, but the white-hot silver of molten metal, of lightning caught in glass. It moved with the terrifying grace of something that had never needed to move quickly, because nothing had ever threatened it. Each step, deliberate. Each breath visible in the winter air like smoke from a furnace. To Rogue. It's him! Rogue, too. The Exile! We have to run! But it was already too late for running. The great black wolf moved. Later, Celine would not be able to recount the specifics, the sequence of movements, the precise choreography of violence. What she remembered was sound, the crack of bones, the sudden silencing of voices, the impact of something massive against the frozen earth. She remembered looking away. She remembered snow, suddenly red. Within seconds, silence returned to the forest. The massive black wolf turned toward her, and for the first time in years, for the first time since long before the divorce papers, long before the cold had settled into her marriage, Celine felt true, clean, animal fear. Thou. Exiled Alpha. The wolf shifted. It was not a comfortable shift to watch. Now this was not the smooth, practiced transition of a trained alpha accustomed to moving between forms with ease. This was a raw thing, a transformation that looked almost reluctant. The great body compressing itself, resisting before the familiar crack and stretch of bones, reforming filled the clearing. And then he stood before her. Alpha Darian Volkov, the exiled Alpha. He was a man built like the forest itself, tall, broad, carrying the particular density of someone who had spent years living outside the comforts of civilization, whose muscles had been shaped not by training, but by survival. His dark hair was overlong, untamed. A scar cut through his left brow and continued down to the corner of his jaw, pale against his winter-darkened skin. He was shirtless despite the cold, apparently unbothered by it, and his silver eyes studied her with the careful intensity of a wolf assessing a situation it had not anticipated. He was, despite everything, extraordinarily difficult to look away from. Darian. You shouldn't be here, Luna. This forest belongs to no one polite." His voice was low, rough at the edges, carrying the cadence of someone who had spent long stretches in silence and was accustomed to choosing words carefully when he did speak. Celine swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "Celine, how do you know who I am?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, something drier, more private. "Darian, the forest speaks, and former Lunas in wedding dresses tend to be memorable." He stepped closer. Selene held her ground, out of pure pride, refusing to step back. And even as every instinct cataloged the sheer volume of danger this man represented. And then something strange happened. Her wolf stirred, not in the cringing, wounded way it had been stirring since the rejection, but differently. An unexpected quickening, a pull toward something rather than away from it. Recognition, as though some deep part of her wolf had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this, for this specific scent, this specific presence, this specific impossible man. Impossible. She refused the sensation. She was grieving. She was exhausted. She was running on nothing but adrenaline and heartbreak. She was not in a state to trust her instincts. Darian's silver eyes narrowed fractionally as though he had noticed the subtle shift in her scent. "And Darian, you're injured." He meant physically, the cuts from the branches, the bleeding from her bare feet against the frozen ground. But they both understood he might have meant something else. "Celine, I'm leaving. Thank you for what you did. But I'm leaving." She tried to walk past him. The world tilted. The combination of cold, barefoot running, shock, grief, and the particular drain of early pregnancy conspired against her all at once, and the darkness came up to meet her, like a wave. The last thing she felt was strong arms catching her before the frozen ground could. The forbidden shelter. Celine awoke to the smell of pine smoke and something herbaceous. Dried rosemary, she thought, and something older, earthier, something she couldn't name. The fire crackled close by. Above her, a rough-hewn wooden beams crossed a low ceiling hung with dried plants and what appeared to be various talismans of bone and carved stone. Protective wards, old ones, the kind that predated pack magic and belonged to a wilder tradition. She was lying on a cot covered in dark furs. Warm. She was actually warm for the first time since she had left the pack house, and the contrast with the cold she had been carrying made her want to stay perfectly still and refuse to acknowledge anything difficult. Darian sat across the room at a wooden table, sharpening a blade with the patient, rhythmic strokes of someone who had done it 10,000 times. He didn't look up when she moved. "Darian, you're safe, for whatever that's worth." Celine sat up slowly. Her hand moved immediately to her stomach. Instinct, not thought. And she pressed gently against the slight swell there, hidden still beneath the ruined silk of her dress, exhaling when she felt no pain, no wrongness. The baby was safe. Relief so acute it brought tears she refused to shed. Darian's blade paused. She felt his attention on her hand, on the gesture. "Darian, you're protecting something." "Celine, nothing. A habit." He looked at her then, those silver eyes direct and unsentimental, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence communicated its opinion clearly. "Darian, you're a terrible liar, former Luna." She straightened her back. She may have been a rejected woman in a ruined wedding dress in a stranger's cabin in the middle of a rogue forest. But she had been Luna of the Drakovich pack for 3 years. And she had learned to hold herself like it even when everything was falling apart. "Celine, I should go. There must be some village. Darian, if you leave tonight, you'll die. Not from rogues, from the storm coming in from the northern peaks. It will hit within the hour. As if to underscore his point, the wind outside intensified. A low, mournful howl that pressed against the cabin walls and found every gap between the boards. Celine sat back down. The silence between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who were wary of each other but not cruel, who had wordlessly arrived at a temporary, cautious truce. After a long while, Darian set down the blade. He crossed to the fire and hung a pot above it, ladling out something that smelled like broth and venison, and then he handed her a bowl without ceremony. Darian, eat. You're running on empty. She ate. The broth was plain and hot and perfect, and she hated slightly how good it tasted. When the bowl was half empty, she said quietly, Celine, why are you in exile? He was quiet for a long moment. Darian, I refused to kill an innocent. My alpha commanded it. I chose differently. Celine, that's what got you exiled? Darian, it's what got me exiled and declared rogue. The crime wasn't the refusal. The crime was the challenge that followed. I lost. And I survived, which they never expected. He said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. He said it like a man who had long ago finished grieving a thing and arrived at some flat, permanent acceptance of it. They sat in silence again, and then he asked, Darian, why was the Luna of the Drakovich pack wandering alone in rogue territory in her wedding dress? Celine looked into the fire. The flames were red and orange and deepest gold, and they held her gaze the way fire always did when a person needed not to be looking at anything in particular. Celine, my mate rejected me for my cousin. A pause. Darian, foolish alpha. The simplicity of it surprised something loose in her chest. Not a grand condemnation, not elaborate sympathy, just that a clean, accurate assessment. Celine almost laughed. Celine, you have absolutely no idea. The awakening bond days passed. The storm that Darian had promised arrived with all the violence he'd implied. Burying the forest under 3 feet of snow and making the paths between the cabin and anything resembling civilization impassable for days. Celine stayed because she had no choice. This was what she told herself. She told herself this with great conviction on the first day, with somewhat less conviction on the second. By the 4th day, when the storm had finally broken but she had not yet suggested leaving, she had mostly stopped bothering with the conviction. Darian was not an easy man to be around. He was quiet, in the way that made you aware of yourself. The way forests were quiet, the way certain heights were quiet, where the absence of noise became a presence of its own. He did not make conversation for the sake of filling silence. He did not soften things unnecessarily. When she asked him something, that he answered it directly or not at all, with no intermediate territory of vague pleasantness. She found, to her bewilderment, that she preferred it. After 3 years of diplomatic social performance, of navigating a household where everything meaningful was said obliquely and everything direct was considered rude, this bluntness was almost restful. He hunted every morning and returned with food. He checked the perimeter of the cabin's ward markings each evening. He never asked why she remained, which she appreciated, because she could not have answered him honestly. But something strange had begun to happen. It had started as a sensation she could almost dismiss. A slight quickening of her pulse when she heard his boots on the porch, a particular awareness of the room's dimensions when he occupied it. Her wolf, and which had been so diminished by the rejection, seemed to become more present in his proximity, more alert, more alive. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself it was the relief of shelter. She told herself any number of reasonable things. On the 7th night, she was sitting by the fire reading one of the few books in the cabin, an old herbalist's manual written by hand, the margins dense with annotations in a script she didn't recognize, when she became aware that Darian had stopped sharpening his blade and was watching her. When she looked up, his silver eyes were steady. Darian. You feel it too. Not a question. Celine. No. The word came out too quickly and too firmly, which was, she supposed, its own answer. Darian. Don't lie to me. I've been polite about it for a week. My wolf is not subtle on the matter. Celine set down the book. She looked at her hands. Celine. It's impossible. I'm a mated female, rejected, but the bond should still be blocking this. It doesn't work this way. Darian. I agree. It shouldn't work this way. His voice was rough, with something she couldn't quite identify. Frustration, or its cousin, which was the tension of a man trying to remain honest with himself about something that made honesty inconvenient. Silence settled between them, different from the previous silences. This one had a shape to it. Darian. Victor completed the rejection. Both ends closed. What you felt in your chest when he said the words, when you signed... Celine. The mark went dark. Darian. The mark went dark. The bond dissolved, which means... He stopped. Looked at her. I looked away. Celine. Which means what? His jaw worked. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd heard it. Darian. Which means you were never truly his. And my wolf, which has not recognized a second mate in 6 years of exile, is now telling me something I am not certain I'm ready to hear. Celine sat very still. The fire popped and settled. Outside, the night held its breath. Celine. I'm carrying another man's child. She said it as plainly as she could. There was no graceful way to say it. And she had learned, was still learning, that she preferred plain truth to elegant evasion. Darian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, it was not what she expected. Darian. I know. Celine. You know? How long? Darian. The scent changed when I caught you. Your wolves with young tend to carry it slightly differently. I've been in the forest long enough to notice. She waited for the recoil, for the recalibration, for some version of the rejection she kept expecting from everyone. It didn't come. Darian. It doesn't change what my wolf is telling me. I wish it did. My life would be considerably simpler. And despite everything, despite the grief and the cold and the impossible strangeness of her situation, Celine felt something loosen inside her chest. Something that had been clenched for so long, she had forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. The child of prophecy. 3 weeks passed. The snow continued but softened, the storms giving way to quieter falls that blanketed the forest in something almost peaceful. Celine began to know the rhythms of the cabin, the way the light entered from the eastern window in the morning, the hour Darian returned from his morning hunt, the way the ward marks on the door frame glowed faint amber when the wind blew from the north. She was getting stronger. The baby was growing. She had begun to help with the herbs, cataloging the dried bundles Darian collected and matching them to the herbalist's manual, which kept her hands busy and her mind somewhat less occupied with the wreckage of her previous life. Darian, she discovered, had an extensive knowledge of forest medicine, practical, empirical, the kind learned from necessity rather than study. She found herself asking him questions, and he found himself answering them. And somewhere in the accumulated hours of that exchange, and the wariness between them had become something else. Not warmth, exactly, something more structural than warmth. A kind of trust, which was more durable. She was sorting dried yarrow one afternoon when the first pain hit. Not ordinary pain. Not the cramping she had been vigilant about since the 2 previous losses, which had left her brittle with anxiety in a way she rarely let herself acknowledge. This pain was different. It moved through her like something electrical, like lightning finding its way down the length of a metal rod, branching through her nervous system in patterns that had nothing to do with ordinary physiology. She collapsed. The yarrow scattered across the floor. Darian was across the room in seconds. She did not know how he moved that quickly, only that he was there, catching her, lowering her to the cot. "Hey, Darian. What's wrong? Is it the baby? Are you bleeding?" Celine. No. No, it's not. It's different, it's... Her Luna mark, which had been dark since the night of the rejection, ignited. Not the familiar gentle gold of a bonded Luna's mark. This was silver-white, the color of lightning, the color of Darian's eyes, blazing with an intensity that made him pull back involuntarily, shielding his face. The light spread from the mark in branching patterns like frost on glass, tracing across her collarbone, down her arms, pooling at her fingertips. The cabin filled with light. And then the air itself seemed to tear open. Ancient runes formed between the ceiling and the floor, not drawn by any hand, not projected by any technology, simply appearing as though they had been written there all along and only now become visible. And they hung in the silver-lit air, rotating slowly, emanating a soundless harmonic that Selene felt in her teeth and her sternum and the hollow of her throat. Darian stood absolutely motionless. Then the voice came. It was not a voice that originated anywhere in the room. It was a voice that originated in the space between moments, between the inhale and the exhale, between heartbeats. It was ancient and plural, and it spoke in a language that was older than the pack system, older than the mating bond, older than anything Selene had been taught. The child of moon and shadow will rise, born of broken bonds and forbidden blood. The world will burn or be reborn, and the choice belongs to the mother who remained. The light released. Selene gasped as the pain receded all at once, leaving behind a profound stillness, and as though every cell in her body had been rearranged into something more deliberate. Darian stared at her from across the cot. His silver eyes were wider than she'd ever seen them, and this from a man whose resting expression suggested he had seen everything worth seeing and been impressed by none of it. Darian, you're carrying a prophecy. Selene. I had no idea. Darian, no, you wouldn't have. He was already moving, already checking the ward marks on the windows, the door, the corners of the room, his movements urgent but controlled. Darian. These marks won't hold against what will come looking for that child. Not once word reaches any of the old bloodlines that a prophecy has been spoken. Selene. Victor, if he finds out... Darian. Victor is the least of your concerns. There are forces older than pack law that have been waiting for this child, have been waiting for centuries. Victor will come for the child because he's greedy and small, and he knows an asset when he hears one prophesied. But the old bloodlines will come for the child because they fear it. He turned to face her. Darian. And I won't let them take you. The simplicity of it. The absolute finality. No condition attached, no calculation visible in the expression, just a statement of fact. delivered with the same plain certainty he brought to everything else. Celine felt the last wall she'd been holding begin, very slowly, to crumble. War awakens. Far to the south, behind stone walls and iron-banded gates, the Drakovich pack house was a place of coiled tension. Now, the great hall smelled of fear, the particular fear of people who had chosen the wrong side of something and were beginning to understand the dimensions of their choice. Alpha Victor Drakovich sat at the head of the long table and stared at the report in his beta's hand without touching it. Victor, say it again. Beta Marcus. She's alive, Alpha. One of the border scouts picked up traces of her scent 3 days ago, north of the Voskova Ridge, and she's not alone. Victor's jaw tightened. Marcus. She's with Darian Volkov. The room fell completely silent. Not the natural quiet of a room with nothing to say, but the violent silence of a room full of people who had a great deal to say and were carefully choosing not to say any of it. Victor stood. He moved to the window. Below, and the courtyard was being swept clear of snow by 2 young pack members who were working very intently and very steadily and clearly wishing themselves elsewhere. Victor, prepare the warriors. All 4 strike units. Irina frowned from her seat at the edge of the table. She had Victor's ear, but not, and she was beginning to understand this more clearly each day. Victor's judgment. Irina. Victor, if you send 4 strike units into the northern forest after Darian Volkov, you're not retrieving a rejected mate. You're starting a war. Victor. Then it's a war. Irina. For a woman you divorced 3 weeks ago? Victor turned, and Irina saw, for the first time, that the calculation in his eyes had nothing to do with Celine herself. Not with love, not with jealousy, not with wounded pride, and though he wore those things on the surface like costumes. Victor. She's pregnant. Did you think I didn't know? I knew the night of the rejection. I had her physician's records pulled the following morning. The silence in the room changed quality entirely. Victor. And now the scouts are reporting strange lights in the northern forest. Prophecy lights, according to my older advisors. Ancient runes visible from half a mile away. He let that sit in the room for a moment. Victor. That child she carries is more than just my heir. It is apparently something rather more significant than that, and I will not allow it to be raised by a disgraced exile in a forest. Marcus. And Volkov? He'll fight. Victor. Then he'll die. He's been living on borrowed time for 6 years. 4 strike units against a lone exile. However strong. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. But Beta Marcus, who had been the practical side of the Drakovich coin for 15 years, and who had read enough history to know how sentences about Darian Volkov tended to end, kept his doubts to himself and went to prepare the warriors. The forbidden mate. Something had shifted between them. They both knew it. Neither had named it. The cabin had become a kind of suspended world. Outside, everything was dangerous and unresolved. Inside, there was fire and silence and the gradual, reluctant discovery that another person could be safe. Celine was awake late one night when Darian returned from the perimeter check, shaking snow from his shoulders, his silver eyes going immediately to her as they always did, checking, cataloging, satisfied. She had stopped pretending not to notice that he did this. They stood on the cabin's narrow covered porch watching the night, their breath visible in the cold air, the moon immense and full above the pine canopy. The forest was quiet and enormous, and they were very small inside it. Darian. You should consider leaving in the morning. The main road south should be passable now. Celine looked at the moon. Celine. They'll hunt me forever. Victor won't let the child go. And the old bloodlines? Darian. I know. But here, my enemies are... Celine. Worse. I know. She turned to face him. They were close in the narrow space. She had stopped noticing at some point the deliberate distance she had been keeping. Celine. I'm not afraid of you. Something moved through his expression. It was not simple. It crossed multiple registers at once in the way of things that meant more than one thing. Darian. You should be. My life is not... Celine. A safe thing. I know. Nothing about my life has been safe for some time, and I've survived it. She placed her hand against his chest, not tentatively, not hesitantly, with the same plain directness he had shown her, because she had been practicing it, had been deciding, one honest thing at a time, who she wanted to be when she came out the other side of this. The mating bond, the second chance bond, the impossible bond that shouldn't have existed, snapped into place between them like a current completing a circuit. The air around them turned silver. Both of them gasped at the force of it. Not the gentle warmth of a developing bond, but the full, but immediate recognition of something that had been delayed and was now all at once arriving. Every nerve between them, every pulse synchronized. Darian caught her hand against his chest, pressing it there, his silver eyes blazing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Darian. Celine, if you stay, there's no turning back. Not from this, not from what's coming. I am not a man who gets to have peace. I haven't been for a long time. She held his gaze. Celine. I lost everything I had. The title, the home, the mate, the life I had built brick by brick for 3 years. A beat. Celine. I lost it. And I'm still here, still standing. I don't want the life I built. I want one I choose. His jaw worked. His hand tightened over hers. Darian. I have enemies you haven't imagined. And I have a price on my head from 3 different territories. Celine. And I have a child prophesied to reshape the world. We're not exactly starting from nothing. And for the first time since she had known him, Darian Volkov smiled. A real one, rusted from disuse, but real. The battle for the Moon Child. The war came at dawn. Darian smelled them first. The coordinated scent of 4 organized strike units moving through the forest in formation, the metallic edge of silver-tipped weapons, the dry fear sweat of soldiers who had been told who they were hunting and had spent the night reconsidering their career choices. He was moving before the sun fully cleared the tree line. Darian. Get to the high ridge. The old watchtower. Stay there. Celine. I can fight. Darian. Not with the child this close, please. The please stopped her, because he never said please. He said things directly, or he didn't say them. She went to the ridge. From the watchtower, she could see it unfold in the forest below. Darian shifting, his massive black wolf erupting across the snow, moving toward the approaching strike units with a controlled aggression that was almost mathematical. He was not frenzied. He was efficient. He had spent 6 years alone in this forest, and he knew every tree, every gully, every natural choke point. He used all of it. The battle was brutal, and she didn't look away, though she wanted to. She watched because it felt important to witness. Because he was fighting for her child, and that deserved witness. She watched warriors fall, and she watched the strike units regroup and adjust. She watched Darian take injuries that would have ended any other wolf and keep moving, and then the trees split open at the southern edge of the battlefield. Victor. He shifted as he cleared the tree line, massive dark gray, his alpha power radiating from him like a heat shimmer. He had not sent his warriors first, and then waited. He had come himself, and Selene understood immediately that this was not about retrieving her. It had never been about retrieving her. This was about the child. The remaining warriors fell back to give their alpha room. Victor's yellow eyes found Selene on the ridge immediately, because of course they did, because he had always been able to find her. She had once thought of this as intimacy, and now understood it as simply tracking. He shifted back. Then he looked up at her. Victor. Selene. Come down. It doesn't have to be this. His voice was smooth, reasonable, the alpha voice he used in council meetings and diplomatic negotiations. She had once found it reassuring. She now found it exactly as trustworthy as everything else he'd said to her. Victor. The child is mine. You know that. Give me the child, and you can go wherever you want. Live your little life with your exile. I won't pursue you. Selene stepped to the edge of the ridge. She was not the same woman who had walked out of his chambers in a ruined dress 3 months ago. She was not the same woman who had signed those papers with shaking hands. Something had hardened in her. Not into brittleness, but into something like bedrock, something with depth and weight and permanence. Her luna mark blazed silver white. Selene. No. The single word rang across the forest like a struck bell. Selene, you told me I wasn't strong enough to be Luna. I believed you. I believed you for 3 years. I believed you for long enough that it started to become true. The silver light spread from her mark into the air around her. Selene, you were wrong, and that ends here. She called to the forest the way the prophecy had called through her, reaching for something old and patient that had always been there, waiting. The trees responded. Not dramatically, not exploding outward in some theatrical display, just a deepening, a sense of the forest becoming more present, more aware, more willing. Victor's warriors shifted uneasily. Several of them took steps backward without appearing to understand why. Victor snarled. He shifted again. He charged. And Darian met him in the center of the clearing. The fight between them shook the earth. 2 alpha wolves, both powerful, both furious, but the fury was different. Victor's was the rage of a man being denied a possession. Darian's was something colder and more total, the absolute commitment of a wolf who has found something worth defending and has no intention of losing it. They moved across the clearing, destroying everything they touched. Trees cracked, snow flew, the sound of the impact reverberating off the mountain face like thunder. The remaining warriors began to retreat, and then Darian found his opening. Victor overextended, a feint, baited and taken, and Darian's jaws closed around his throat with the precision of 6 years of solitary combat mastery. Not killing, holding. Victor went still. And the silence that followed was total. Darian held the grip for a long moment. Long enough that every warrior in the clearing understood what could happen and had not. Long enough that the forest itself seemed to exhale. Then he released. Victor stumbled back, shifted human, hand at his throat, his yellow eyes furious and, for the first time Selene had ever seen, afraid. Darian, leave this forest. Leave this territory. Leave her and the child to their lives. If I see you or yours in this forest again, I won't hold. Victor looked up at the ridge, at Selene. Whatever he saw in her face told him the calculation was over. He left. The warriors retreated with him quickly, quietly, with the disciplined haste of professionals who had assessed the situation and arrived at the same conclusion. The forest settled back into silence. Darian shifted human, bloodied, and looked up at the ridge. Selene came down. The child who will change the world. 3 months later. The mountain forest in the hour before spring. The snows had retreated. Not everywhere. The highest peaks still held their white in the way of things that never entirely let go. But in the valley and along the lower ridges, the first true green had appeared. Cautious, pale, profound. Selene sat outside the cabin in the late afternoon light, wrapped in the dark fur Darian had placed around her shoulders without comment 4 weeks ago, and which had since become simply hers. The air carried the smell of pine and thaw, and faintly, and the smoke from inside where Darian was doing something complicated to the ward marks that she had learned not to interrupt. In her arms, her son. He was small, the way newborns were small, the kind of small that made you acutely aware of how much potential was compressed into how little space. His eyes, when they opened, were the silver of his father's and the gold of Selene's Luna mark mixed together into something new. A color that had no name yet in any catalog of wolf lineage. His hands were perfect. His weight against her chest was perfect. She had named him Kalen, which was an old name from before the pack systems, from the ancient language the prophecy runes had been written in. It meant, approximately, the one who comes between things. Darian had said, dryly, that this was perhaps setting very high expectations. And she had said that she preferred that to setting low ones. He had not argued. The second chance bond had settled in the weeks since the battle. Not dramatically, not in the explosive all-at-once way the first recognition had felt, but gradually, the way good things tended to settle, like water finding its level, like light adjusting to the size of a room. She had stopped being surprised by it and started being grateful for it, which felt more sustainable. Darian was not an easy man. She did not think he would become one. He was cautious where she was direct. He was self-sufficient where she was collaborative. He carried his years of exile in his body the way the pines carried the memory of lightning strikes. Visibly, structurally, without apology. But he was present. He was honest. He had never, and in all the weeks she'd known him, said a thing he didn't mean, and she had learned to understand this as a profound form of care. It was not the care she had been taught to expect, with its softness and performance. It was harder and more durable, and she was finding she preferred things that lasted. He came out onto the porch, having apparently finished whatever he'd been doing inside, and stood behind her chair with his hand on her shoulder. A gesture that remained slightly awkward because physical affection was still a new language for him, practiced rather than natural. She loved it for that reason. Kalen opened his silver-gold eyes and looked up at his father. Darian looked back. Something shifted in his expression. Something she recognized by now as the version of tenderness he was capable of, and which was not warm and soft, but still and absolute, like the center of a deep lake. Darian. He's going to be more than either of us can prepare him for. Selene. Probably. Darian. That concerns you. Selene. It concerns me the way any impossible future concerns me, which is I'll manage it. When we get there. He was quiet for a moment. Darian. We'll manage it. The correction was slight, but she felt it like something placed in her hands, an offering carefully considered. Selene. Yes. We will. Kalen made a sound. Not a cry. Something more like a statement. His tiny hand found Selene's finger and held it with the unself-conscious strength of a wolf child, which was considerable. The afternoon light turned gold and long across the mountain. But in the old territories, And in the ruins of the battlefield where Victor's warriors had retreated, something had taken up residence. It had no form yet. It was a presence more than a shape, an attention, a direction, a leaning toward. Those who passed through the ruined clearing on the nights after the battle reported that the snow there never fully melted, even in the thaw, that the trees at the perimeter had grown new growths that curved inward toward the center of the clearing, like an audience facing a stage, that sometimes, standing in the center at the right time of night, you could hear a voice, not the silver-bright voice of the prophecy that had spoken through Selene. Older than that, rougher, something that had been patient for a very, very long time, and was only now beginning to feel the edges of its patience. If you stood there long enough to listen, and no one who heard it stayed long enough, you might hear it say, "The first act is complete. The child breathes. The bond is sealed. Now the real game begins." Deep in the cabin on the mountain, in his mother's arms, Kalen's eyes opened fully for just a moment. Silver and gold, and something else, something neither parent had yet seen, something that had not existed in any wolf lineage in recorded history. And in the center of his small chest, in the place where the bond would one day form, in the place that was still new and growing and full of unwritten possibility, a second heartbeat answered. Final narration. One Luna was betrayed by the man who swore to protect her. One Alpha was exiled for the crime of conscience. And their child was written into the fabric of fate before he drew his first breath. But fate is not a fixed thing. It is a river, wide, deep, moving toward a sea that no one has yet mapped. The prophecy has been spoken. The bond has been sealed. The child sleeps in the arms of a mother who chose her own path, and a father who learned, in the cold patience of exile, that some things are worth fighting for. And somewhere in the ancient dark, something older than pack law and mating bonds is waking up, turning its attention toward a mountain cabin and the silver-eyed child inside it. This was only the beginning. End of Book 1. Continue the story in Mated to the Forbidden Alpha. The Shadows Rise.